Welcome, dear listener, and welcome to Sleepy Historian, the cozy corner of YouTube where boring history, soft storytelling, and gentle sounds come together to help you rest, reflect, and maybe even fall asleep. If you've been falling asleep to boring history lately, you're in good company. Whether it's the quiet echo of an ancient hallway or the soft rustle of parchment turning beneath candlelight, these stories are here to soothe. Where are you listening from tonight? Are you wrapped in a blanket with headphones on? Perhaps your eyes are already growing heavy, or maybe you're simply in need of bedtime relaxation and soft storytelling to guide your thoughts away from the day. Here, we don't rush. We don't dramatize. We tell tales of the past. Slowly, gently, with care. So, if you enjoy calm bedtime storytelling, soft-spoken history documentaries, or relaxing history to fall asleep to, you're exactly where you need to be. Some call it boring. We call it bedtime. Tonight's history sleep story is one that might just make you rethink your own nightly routine. We're diving into something that sounds ordinary, but was anything but. We're talking about sleep in the medieval world. Not kings and conquests, not swords and sieges, just sleep. But here's the strange part. In medieval Europe, sleep didn't happen the way it does today. People didn't just close their eyes and drift off for 8 solid hours. No, back then, sleep came in shifts, in strange rhythms, in shared spaces, in complete darkness or under starlight, on hay, stone, or straw, sometimes even upright, wrapped in wool. There were rituals, superstitions, rules, and yes, even a few odd surprises. You'll learn about things like the mysterious first sleep and second sleep, why people feared sleeping near open windows, and why monks might be up at 2 a.m. singing in the dark. There's so much to explore, and yet nothing to rush. Let the rhythm of their lives begin to soothe you. So now, dear listener, take a long, slow breath. Let go of your day. Let the past drift softly in. And if you enjoy the sleepy journey through time, don't forget to tap like and gently subscribe to join the Sleepy Historian again soon. Now then, blow out the candle, pull the covers close, and imagine yourself in a cool stone room, a hearth flickering low, and the hush of a world long gone. Let us begin. Imagine it's nightfall in a small medieval village. The sun has sunk behind the trees. A bell in the distance has rung the evening hour. The animals have gone still. The fires reduced to embers, and in the quiet hush that follows, people begin preparing for something far less simple than we might expect: going to bed. In medieval Europe, the idea of a bed wasn't always soft, private, or even horizontal. There were no memory foam pillows or queen-size frames. Instead, sleeping arrangements varied widely, from large shared platforms covered in straw to raised wooden boxes built into the walls of cottages and castles alike. If you lived in a small peasant home, your bed might simply be a pile of hay, tucked into a corner near the hearth, with a woolen blanket or a patched linen sheet. You might share it with spouse or a child, or on colder nights, perhaps even a chicken or two brought inside to stay warm. Beds were often made from ropes or slats stretched across wooden frames. These would sag over time and had to be tightened frequently, a task that gave rise to the phrase, sleep tight. Soft, woven mattresses filled with straw or feathers were a luxury, often reserved for those in wealthier households. There were no standardized sleeping hours. Candles were precious, and the rhythms of the sun and moon ruled daily life. So when darkness fell, people wound down with it, slowly, methodically. Clothing was rarely changed for sleep. Nightgowns were worn by the more affluent, but most villagers simply slept in their undergarments, or whatever they had worn through the day. Some wrapped themselves in cloaks or outer garments for warmth. Bedrooms, when they existed at all, were sparsely furnished and often multi-purpose. And the idea of privacy, as we know it, simply didn't exist. Families often shared a single sleeping space with minimal partitions. Guests might sleep on benches or under tables. Servants often slept in the kitchens or tucked into the ends of hallways, close to fire or their master's chambers. In castles and manor houses, the picture was more ornate, but still not quite luxurious by modern standards. Large beds with heavy wooden posts and thick drapery helped trap warmth and keep out pests. Curtains weren't just for show. They were essential in cold stone rooms. And yet, whether rich or poor, the bed was more than a place to rest. It was a stage for ritual, for routine, and sometimes for fear. The darkness was deep, often absolute. Candles were rare and expensive. Without modern lighting, the medieval night could feel endless, and what lay in the shadows, real or imagined, often kept people from fully surrendering to sleep. This was just the beginning of the night. Sleep, as you'll soon discover, came in shifts. But before that, let's rest here a moment. In the gentle hush of a medieval room, with its flickering fire and its uneven floor, as another long day gives way to the strange rhythm of sleep. Now that we've settled into our wooden beds or straw-filled pallets, tucked beneath heavy wool, something curious happens. We don't sleep straight through the night. Instead, we begin to experience what many medieval people would have called the first sleep. This first phase of slumber typically began not long after nightfall, soon after the fire was banked and the last candle snuffed out. The room darkens completely, perhaps save for a sliver of moonlight, and the body begins to rest. This first sleep would last around 3 to 4 hours. During that time, the body entered a deep, restorative state. But unlike our modern notion of uninterrupted rest, people in the Middle Ages often woke up naturally in the middle of the night. And here's where things become especially intriguing. The period between first sleep and second sleep, often an hour or more, was considered perfectly normal. People used this quiet, in-between time for all kinds of things. They might pray, reflect, mend clothing by firelight, tend to the animals, speak softly with a spouse, or even step outside to use a latrine under starlight. There are dozens of records from physicians, clergy, even court documents that mention this watch or wake interval as a common, expected part of the night. In some traditions, this period was believed to be a moment of heightened thought or spiritual clarity. Monasteries even structured their prayer hours around it. A person might rise and recite a few psalms, read if they were literate, or simply sit quietly in the dark. In wealthier homes, a servant might quietly enter to stoke the fire or deliver warm ale before the house fell back into its second slumber. After this brief interlude, people would gradually return to their beds for what was called second sleep. The second stretch was typically lighter, often filled with dreams. Some described it as more restless, more reflective, and occasionally interrupted by the early noises of the waking world. A rooster crowing, a cart clattering on cobblestone, a servant shifting in the hall. This two-part pattern, first and second sleep, was so widely accepted that it shaped how people planned their nights. Doctors in the Middle Ages even advised patients on what to do during this middle watch, suggesting gentle stretching or calm reflection to improve digestion or mood. Far from being seen as insomnia or restlessness, it was simply normal. It's easy to imagine how different life must have felt, with the night divided not into uninterrupted silence, but into a kind of rhythm: sleep, wake, sleep again. A natural pause in the darkness that gave space for thought, for closeness, or for quiet solitude. As we lie here now, wrapped in the warmth of linen or wool, let your mind drift through this forgotten pattern of sleeping in two gentle chapters, with a quiet pause of nightfall in between. By now, the house has grown colder. The coals in the hearth have sunk into silence, and even the last flickers of candlelight have long gone out. You lie back, perhaps on a straw mattress or a thick woolen rug, and listen to the sound that filled the stillness. The medieval night was never entirely quiet. It spoke in hushed tones, in distant creaks of timber beams, in the breath of wind through the shutters, in the murmurs of animals settling in stalls just beyond the wall. In towns and villages, you might hear the slow clop of a guard's boots as he makes his round, or the yawn of old would his home settle into sleep. In wealthier manors, the rustle of a servant step down stone corridors, or the hush of distant bells from a monastery, gently dividing the night with sacred rhythm. Even the dark had its rhythm, and it held within it the strange landscapes of medieval dreams. Sleep, in this age, was both natural and mysterious. People believed dreams could carry messages, reveal omens, or uncover truths hidden in waking life. In noble households, dreams were sometimes recorded, shared with priests or healers for interpretation. Some believed dreams were shaped by the position of the moon or the scent of herbs burned before bed. Lavender, chamomile, or mugwort might be tucked into the bedding to soothe the mind or ward off evil spirits. And evil spirits were no small matter. The night was filled with invisible presences, or so people thought. There were prayers whispered before sleep to keep away nightmares, and crosses hung above beds to guard against the things that walked unseen. The thin line between sleep and waking, between dream and spirit, was fragile in the medieval imagination. In monasteries, sleep was a sacred act, yet carefully timed. Monks slept in assigned intervals, sometimes waking multiple times a night to chant in the darkness. Their dreams were not personal, but divine, seen as reflections of the inner soul, shaped by discipline and devotion. And for the common folk, sleep was simply a necessary retreat from the cold, from the labor, from hunger or hardship. But even so, it was not without its poetry. A child might sleep curled in a parent's arms, listening to the low hum of a lullaby passed down for generations. A laborer might drift off with sore hands and full belly, soothed by the echo of crickets outside the door. A midwife might rest her eyes between long hours, trusting the hush to hold her steady. These were the rhythms of medieval sleep, more vulnerable, more fragmented, and yet somehow just as human. Let the sounds of that long-ago night settle around you now. Imagine a soft wind whispering through an unshuttered window, the slow breath of someone beside you, and the dreams of 1,000 years past flickering into the dark. Imagine now a monastery, silent, stone-built, and standing still in the middle of a frosted countryside. It is the year 1238. The monastery bell has just sounded matins, the midnight hour of prayer, and Brother Aldrich, a young novice not long in his robe, gently lifts his body from a thin straw mattress. There is no alarm, no clock on the wall. His waking is guided by the rhythm of bells and the well-worn habits of the monks around him. He moves without speaking, his woolen robe whispering as it slides over linen. This is Aldrich's life, a life lived not in daylight, but in the folds of night. When he first arrived at the abbey, sent by his family to learn discipline and devotion, Aldrich was barely more than a boy. The towering halls, the heavy doors, the cold silence, they pressed upon with a weight he had not imagined. But over time, the darkness became familiar, not frightening, but grounding, a rhythm unlike anything outside these walls. Monastic sleep was never long or luxurious, the rule of St. Benedict, followed by many medieval monasteries. Structured time down to the hour, monks slept in short bursts, waking frequently to pray, at midnight for matins, before dawn for lauds, and again throughout the day. Their lives were spiritual, but deeply physical too, shaped by bells, books, and the careful spacing of sleep. Brother Aldrich's chamber is bare. A wooden cot, a small stool, a single candle stub, to be used sparingly. His breath clouds the air in winter months, and the only warmth comes from the wool wrapped around his shoulders and the slow heat of inner calm as the other monks stir, some with groggy limbs, others with silent precision. They gather in the cloister and shuffle quietly toward the chapel. Outside, the world is asleep, but here, under a vaulted ceiling and flickering lanterns, chants begin to rise, soft, low, unhurried, Latin syllables falling like rain into the still air. Agnus Dei, Catalis Peccata Mundi. It is a scene Aldred has come to love, not for its spectacle, but for its softness. In the darkness, voices blend. No one shines. No one speaks above another. The night becomes a shared breath, and prayer a kind of sleep that never ends. When the service ends, the monks file silently back to their cells, not to talk, not to read, but to rest again for another brief stretch before the next bell. This broken rhythm, sleep, wake, pray, return, becomes Aldred's way of life, and though it seems strange to us now, to him it feels perfectly natural. He begins to feel the changes in his body before the bells even ring. The rhythm has become part of him. His dreams, when they come, are soft. Sometimes they are filled with glowing script and golden light. Sometimes they are quiet shadows, memories of his village, or imagined places from scripture. And often they are simply still. To be a monk in a medieval world was not to escape sleep, but to shape it, to mold the night into something sacred, something shared, something greater than the self. In Brother Aldred's world, sleep was not stolen by duty. It was partnered with it, woven gently into the chant of midnight and the silence between bells. There was one task Brother Aldred came to perform more than any other, one that was neither dramatic nor prestigious, and yet quietly vital to the rhythm of the monastery, the night watch. It was not uncommon in monastic communities for one brother to be assigned the quiet duty of watching while others slept, not for fear of danger, but as a kind of living candle, a soul awake while the world rested. Aldred would often volunteer, not because he found sleep elusive, but because the stillness of the monastery at night seemed to invite a deeper kind of reflection. He felt closer to something, not just to God, but to the hush between moments, the invisible thread that tied one breath to the next. His duties were simple. He would walk the cold corridors of cloister, listening for anything out of place, not as a guard, but as a steward of peace. He would check the chapel's lanterns, make sure no cinder smoldered unattended, and sometimes pause in the scriptorium, where hours of quiet copying had left behind the scent of ink and vellum. The monastery, at night, was a place transformed. By day, it buzzed with ritual, with quiet labor, with voices raised in chant. But by night, it breathed slowly, deeply. The stone walls held echoes longer. The air felt thicker. Even the creak of a wooden beam seemed louder, more ancient. Aldred would wrap his robe tighter and pass silently through these spaces, aware of every small sound. The flutter of a mouse behind a shelf, the drip of condensation down a column, the low whistled wind through a high window, and somewhere nearby, dozens of his brothers slept, their breaths rising and falling in unison, like a field of wheat bending in the wind. Sometimes he would pause beside the dormitory and simply listen, not intruding, not entering, just listening. There was comfort in the knowledge that all was well, that those around him rested undisturbed. Occasionally, he would see others rise for their own quiet reasons, a monk padding barefoot down the hall, perhaps to the lavatorium, or to kneel in silent prayer in the chapel side nave. No words passed between them, only nods faint and slow, like ships in fog. The hours would pass, marked only by the faint toll of bell or the changing scent of the air, cooler, damper, as dawn crept near. And when his watch ended, Brother Aldred would return to his narrow cot, his limbs stiff, but his spirit light. It was not just a task completed. It was a kind of offering, a devotion made not with words or incense, but with quiet presence, For while others slept, he had watched. He had kept the peace. He had listened to the breath of the night. And in doing so, he had joined a long, forgotten lineage, one that stretches far before and far beyond, of those who tend to silence gently, patiently, faithfully. Years passed. The boy who once stumbled from his bed at midnight, blinking in candlelight, had grown into a man, quiet, steady, and lined with the weight of ritual. Brother Aldrich's life was never marked by spectacle. There were no wars fought, no great writings left behind. But in the slow rhythm of his days, and especially his nights, something sacred endured. He became known among the brothers not for eloquence or strength, but for gentleness. He was the one who sat beside the sick, the one who recited psalms in the softest tone, the one who never rushed a moment, never sought acclaim. He was the kind of man whose presence felt like a hearth, warm and steady, glowing even in silence. But time, as ever, marched gently forward. In the late years of his life, Aldrich began to wake more often during the night, not for prayer, not for duty, but because of discomfort. His breath became shallow, and cold crept deeper into his bones. The abbey's physician, more an herbalist than a doctor, brought him teas of valerian and yarrow, rubbed warming oils into his joints, and whispered reassurances. But it was clear to all that Brother Aldrich was fading. He spent his final nights not in his cell, but in the infirmary, a warm, low-ceiling room with a small fire kept constantly alive. Other aging brothers lay nearby, and the scent of rosemary hung in the air from bundles tucked beneath their beds. Even as illness took root, Aldrich's mind remained clear. He continued to rise from matins when he could, though now supported by younger hands. He no longer walked the cloisters alone, but he would sit by the window and listen to the night sounds, as he had done for so many decades. In his final days, he spoke of dreams, vivid ones. He said he saw a candle burning in a field of snow, a great bell that rang without sound, a corridor with no walls, just stars on either side. To those who sat with him, these were not just fever visions. They were the language of a man who had spent his life watching the stillness, who had lived not just beside the night, but within it. He passed away just before dawn, as the sky blushed faintly above the chapel roof. The bell was rung softly, not a peal of sorrow, but a single note, low and full, that drifted out across the fields like a breath. Brother Aldrich was buried in the abbey grounds beneath a simple stone. No grand epitaph, no carved effigy, just a patch of earth where wildflowers grew in spring and snow lay clean in winter. But in the memory of his brothers, and perhaps in the hush that still clings to those halls at night, something of him remained. A watcher, a sleeper, a quiet steward of the hours when the world forgot itself. And so, as you lie here now, wrapped in your own quiet space, perhaps you can feel the echo of that life, not one of noise, but of presence, not one of ambition, but of gentle rhythm. Let it soothe you as the final sleep of Brother Aldrich rolls softly into your own. Let us drift now out of the monastery walls, beyond the reach of candles and bells, and into the sleeping villages of medieval Europe. Here, in the hush between that first and second sleep, when fires burn low and stars press against shuttered windows, something quietly curious once unfolded. The middle of the night was not, as we might expect, a time of total stillness. For the common folk, peasants, artisans, herders, this in-between stretch, often called a watch, was more than just a pause. It was, in many homes, a ritualized hour, an ancient and surprisingly active pocket of time that modern life has nearly forgotten. By day, life was filled with toil, fields to be tilled, bread to be baked, wool to be spun. But in the quiet of the middle night, after first sleep had lifted and before second sleep returned, the house felt different. The hearth, still faintly glowing, was gently stoked back to life. A pot might be set back upon it, perhaps for a warming broth or spice wine. It was not uncommon for people to rise quietly, pad across the cold floor, and sit wrapped in cloaks near the coals, musing in silence or murmuring soft conversation. Some households use this time to pray, not formally like the monks, but privately. A candle might be lit before a wooden crucifix or holy token, and a few verses of scripture whispered aloud in the flickering dark. Others use this time for intimacy. In many parts of Europe, midnight was regarded as an especially fruitful time for conceiving children. Physicians of the age even advised couples to rise and be together between sleeps, claiming it aligned with natural humors. And still others took the opportunity to work, to spin a little more thread, mend clothing, sharpen tools, or prepare for the day to come. These tasks were not burdensome, but quiet, the kind of slow, meditative labor that suited the still air of night. From an archaeological perspective, this practice is elusive. Beds do not leave artifacts. Silence does not fossilize. But written accounts, from diaries, medical texts, letters, all echo the same curious rhythm. Sleep was not linear. It came in two parts, and in between, people lived. Some researchers even point to fire pit layers and soot analysis in certain homes, showing renewed use during the middle night, suggesting this brief waking was not a rare exception, but a widespread expectation. Imagine yourself there now. The children still sleep. The animals have long quieted, but you are awake, not anxiously, but gently, wrapped in a shawl, a cup of warm ale in hand, listening to the old beams creak above. You sit, not waiting for anything, just resting in a kind of forgotten pause. The night becomes yours. Not stolen, not resisted, but welcomed. This was a world shaped not by alarm clocks or electric lights, but by firelight and instinct, by the pulse of stars and the deep wisdom of rest that did not demand silence, but invited softness. We will go deeper yet, into the customs that surrounded dreams, death, and sleep itself. But for now, rest in this moment, in the in-between, in the rhythm of the medieval night. As the fire faded and silence thickened in the small homes and halls of the medieval world, something peculiar stirred in the minds of those tucked beneath woolen covers. Dreams. To the people of the Middle Ages, dreams were not just random flickers of memory or imagination. They were messengers, sometimes divine, sometimes demonic, but rarely meaningless. Imagine now the hush of a peasant cottage after first sleep. One of the family members, a young woman perhaps, wakes startled, not by a sound, but by a vision that still clings like cobwebs. A red fox with a bleeding paw, a church bell that tolls underwater, a stairway that never ends. Such strange visions were remembered, often recounted, sometimes feared. In an age where few could read, memory was sacred. Dreams were whispered to elders, to clergy, or to the wise women who kept herbal lore and ancient tales. Symbols had meaning. Wolves warned of betrayal, apples of temptation, fire of change or loss. Dreams were not written down, but passed from mouth to ear, folded into family stories like creases in old linen. Noble households, better educated and more connected to church teachings, often saw dreams as spiritual communications. A nobleman might wake and record his dream in Latin, then bring it to his confessor. Was it sent by God, by the devil, or by his own troubled mind? Clerics pored over ancient texts like Macrobius and Boethius to help categorize dreams. Insomnium, disturbing echoes of the day. Visio, divine revelation visum, a waking vision, and more. Each had meaning. Each carried weight. There were even traveling dream interpreters, men and women who wandered the countryside offering insight. Some were seen as holy, others were feared as witches. In monasteries, dreams were noted not with excitement but caution. The rule of Saint Benedict warned against indulgence in dreams. lest pride or temptation take root. Yet even the strictest monks could not deny that in the deepest hours of sleep, visions sometimes came. And among the sick, especially those near death, dreams were often seen as glimpses beyond. A dying man dreaming of golden meadows or distant music might be said to have seen paradise. A woman dreaming of wolves circling her bed might receive a final confession just in case. Folk traditions abounded. Some placed iron under pillows to ward off bad dreams. Others hung garlic near beds or placed holy relics on nightstands. Still others avoided certain foods at supper, believing onions, beans, or certain cheeses stirred up too much in the belly and thus disturbed the soul during sleep. And through all of it was fear, but also wonder. Dreams were one of the few places the rich and poor, the literate and illiterate, the pious and the pagan, all shared something equally unknowable, a place where the world softened, where spirits whispered, where the veil thinned. So as you rest at night, imagine your dreams, not as distractions or echoes, but as part of a long, ancient pattern, one shared by shepherds in the field, monks in stone cells, queens in high towers, and you, lying now in stillness, drifting gently between worlds. In the medieval world, few things were more sacred or more feared than the last sleep. To modern ears, it may sound poetic, but to medieval hearts, death was both a passage and a trial. A final sleep, yes, but one for which the soul woke somewhere else. Imagine now a quiet stone room. A single rushlight flickers. The bed is low and narrow, stuffed with straw, its sheets of coarse wool. An elderly man lies beneath them, his breathing shallow, his fingers moving faintly as if grasping something unseen. This is a deathbed, circa the year 1381. In this moment, sleep and death are not far apart, and across medieval Europe, people prepared for this moment with great care. A priest would be summoned, often in the very early stages of illness, to deliver the last rites, a sequence of prayers and sacraments designed to ease the soul from body to eternity. It began with confession, then followed by the Eucharist, called viaticum or food for the journey, and finally the anointing of the sick, with sacred oil brushed gently on the forehead and hands. If the dying person still had breath, they were encouraged to whisper prayers. If not, those gathered would pray for them, invoking saints, angels, and the Virgin Mary. To die in one's bed, surrounded by prayer, was considered a good death, a mors bona. To die suddenly, or in sleep without preparation, was feared. And so, over centuries, rituals began to intertwine with rest. Candles placed at the bedside, crosses held in trembling hands, psalms murmured through the night. Even after death, the body was not immediately removed. It was watched. The vigil, they called it. Neighbors, family, or monks would sit with the departed through the night, keeping candles lit and prayers flowing. They believed the soul lingered nearby and should not be left alone in darkness. Children were taught early that sleep was practiced for the final rest. Parents would bless their little ones with a cross on the brow before bed. "May angels guard your sleep," they'd whisper. And in some homes, a small bowl of holy water stood near the door, where fingers could dip and mark a cross before sleeping. The language of death and the language of bedtime blurred. Sleep, in lullabies and sermons alike, was often described as a little death, and death, in return, was spoken of as a final sleep. Grave markers bore simple inscriptions, "Here lies," but in some places, more poetic words would be used. "He has gone to rest. She sleeps in peace." The cemetery itself was often called God's acre, not just a field of graves, but a garden of sleepers awaiting the morning of resurrection. This vision of death as a sleep gave comfort to many. It made the unknown feel less strange. It allowed mothers to grieve children as if they were still dreaming. It let the aged close their eyes with quiet dignity. Even today, echoes of this belief remain in the words we speak, in the lullabies we sing, in the hush that settles at nightfall, when lights dim and hearts slow. So now, as you lie still in your own bed, safe, warm, and watched by gentle rhythms, know that you're part of something ancient, a lineage of sleepers, of dreamers, of those who fear the night, and those who welcomed it. Let it wrap around you, soft as wool, light as a whispered prayer. Not all medieval sleep was woven from straw and shadow. In the high stone halls of nobility, behind iron gates and embroidered curtains, slumber took on another shape. Let us now drift up the winding tower stairs, past flickering torches, and into a noble's chamber, where sleep lived among velvet, fur, and silence. The beds here were grand, not only for comfort, but for status. Raised high on platforms, surrounded by carved oak or walnut, and crowned with thick canopies, they were dressed in layers of linen, wool, and sometimes ermine or fox fur in winter. But these were not beds one simply fell into. A nobleman's bedtime was a ritual, deliberate and layered. First came the disrobing, aided by a servant or valet. Robes of fine wool or silk were exchanged for nightshirts, long and often embroidered. Next came washing. A basin of warm water would be brought to the chamber, sometimes perfumed with rose or lavender oil. A towel, perhaps imported from Flanders, was held out, folded precisely. Before bed, noblemen often read or were read to, not fairy tales, but texts on philosophy, scripture, or statecraft. Illumination by candle or oil lamp cast flickering shadows on tapestry-covered walls. The images of hunting scenes or saints softly rippling as flames danced. If married, a nobleman and his wife might share a bed, though not always. Separate chambers were common among the elite, especially for high-born women who prized privacy. But whether alone or not, the chamber was never truly private. Servants often slept nearby, on pallets at the foot of the bed, or in adjacent nooks. They were there to tend to needs through the night, to stoke the fire, bring water, or even wake their master at specific hours for matters of court or prayer. And yet, despite the comfort, sleep was elusive. The noble class bore the weight of power, and with it came restlessness. Wars to plan, lands to oversee, alliances to maintain. Diaries and letters in the time hint at noblemen who tossed and turned, haunted by omens, debts, or political unease. One account tells of a count who had his priest sleep outside his chamber door, just in case visions came. Another tells of a duchess who awoke nightly at the same hour, convinced her dead child visited her in dreams. They did not wake to alarms, but an instinct or servants instructed to whisper gently, "It is time, my lord." And so, even behind thick curtains and silk sheets, sleep remained uncertain. It was tended like a fire, carefully, reverently, but always under threat of wind. Tonight, imagine you are there. The tapestries are heavy with dust and age. The chamber cool, though the fire glows steadily. You are wrapped in linen. The quiet murmur of voices in the corridor beyond your last tether to the world outside. Breathe in the hush of a castle at night, where power sleeps uneasily, and dreams wear crowns of velvet. Beyond the Lord's chamber, across a quiet corridor draped in tapestries, a heavy door creaks open to reveal the softer realm of a noblewoman's bedchamber, a space more delicate, but no less burdened. Imagine the hush of such a room. A four-posted bed trimmed in embroidered linens. A small altar in the corner, its cloth gently lifting in the night air. On the floor, woven rugs dull the chill of stone, and a cushioned stool rests by the fire, where a young handmaid now dozes with her head bowed. This is not a place of loud dreams or restless pacing. Here, sleep is managed with care, a ritual in itself. The noblewoman's day would have been long, even if spared from field or furnace. Her hours were filled with duties of courtly etiquette, estate management, needlework, and diplomacy. A baroness, a duchess, or even a modest lady of manor often bore the responsibility of running a household, with dozens of servants, visiting clerics, and guests to consider. And yet at night, the demands did not cease entirely. Before sleep, she might dictate letters by lamplight, correspondence of family, to fellow noble women, or perhaps to a distant suitor. A trusted maid might brush her hair, stroke after stroke, in silence or while murmuring a favorite song. In some cases, she would read from a prayer book illuminated in gold, the image of the Virgin glancing up from its pages. But many nights she waited. It was not uncommon for a noble woman to lie awake for hours, listening for word from a battlefield, for the late return of a hunting party, for the cry of a child in the next chamber, or for her husband's footsteps, heavy or hesitant, down the corridor. Some nights she prayed, others she wept. In her world, sleep was precious and sometimes elusive. There was no guarantee of peace, even among the pillows of privilege. Those lucky enough to bear children often woke in the night to feed, to check, to soothe. Midwives and wet nurses helped, but the emotional weight remained. In colder months, children slept close, wrapped beside her to share warmth. For unmarried noble women, nights were different still. Often placed in service to more powerful households, they waited on mistresses, dressed their hair, stoked their fires, but also dreamed silently of lives beyond. Many would rise during the first watch of the night to walk the gallery, their slippered feet muffled on cold flagstones, their minds a tangle of hope, duty, and fear. And then, eventually, sleep would come, soft and slow, wrapped in the rustle of silks, the scent of lavender sachets, and the steady breath of the chambermaid curled nearby. Tonight, as you drift gently beneath your own covers, think of her, the noble woman who waited for peace, for sleep, for morning. When daylight faded from the high stained glass and the clamor of goblets and footsteps had died away, the great hall of a medieval castle changed its face entirely. By day, it was a seat of power, a space for feasting, judgment, and display. But by night, it became something softer, stranger, a shared chamber of quiet labors, weary guards, and dreams that smelled faintly of smoke and spilt wine. Imagine the embers still glowing in the central hearth. A final log collapses inward with a sleepy sigh of ash. The rushes on the floor, scattered with herbs and crushed petals, muffle the sounds of shifting bodies. Cloaks are spread as bedding. A few servants snore softly, their dreams braided with the scent of roast meats and wool. For many, especially in less wealthy castles or during times of travel, the great hall was a sleeping place, not for lords and ladies, but for everyone else. Chambermaids, messengers, visiting clerics, musicians who had played that evening song now rested their heads on satchels. Pages curled up near walls. Squires laid their armor to the side and stretched out beside it, one hand always near the hilt of a dull training sword. At the outer edge of the slumbering crowd were the guards, not quite asleep, but not fully awake either. They paced, dozed upright on benches, or leaned against cool stone. Each hour, a bell might chime from the chapel tower, and the watch would change. The rhythm of these movements, slow, familiar, threaded to the sleep of all within. And then there were the stories, because the great hall, after midnight, belonged also to the old tales, the whispered kind traded in half-sleep. Ghosts were said to walk beneath the banners. A woman in white, forever weeping for a lost child. A knight whose armor clanked from shadow to shadow. A servant girl whose death, long forgotten, still echoed near the stairwell. These tales were not told in full voice. They were murmured between blankets, under breath, with just enough detail to chill but not disturb. A way to pass time, a way to make the dark less empty. Some believed in these spirits, others laughed, but almost everyone at one time or another turned their eyes upward to the heavy rafters above and wondered what watched from the beams. Even the architecture seemed asleep. The carved lines above the doors seemed softer. The great windows, now only faint silhouettes, wept moonlight down onto quiet forms below. And in that hush, between snores, between steps of patrolling boots, the castle seemed to breathe. Not loudly, not fearfully, just steadily. So, tonight, think of the Great Hall, not in splendor, but in sleep. A place where rich and poor did not share a table, but did share the silence that followed. And here, too, in your own room, perhaps you feel that same stillness now, not haunted, but held. And now, dear listener, we've wandered softly through the stone corridors of time, from straw beds and whispered prayers to embroidered pillows and ghost-lit halls, from the washerwoman's blistered hands to the noblewoman's sleepless sighs. You've heard the echoes of 1,000 footsteps, slow and steady. You watched lamps dim, firewood crackle, curtains fall. And now, the house is quiet again. These stories we've shared tonight, this long, boring history for sleep, are not just facts and fables. They are the soft breathing of a world long gone, and yet somehow still with us, because we still sleep, we still wake to dreams, we still chase comfort through the night, hoping to find peace on the other side of rest. Somewhere in you is a peasant child curling beneath coarse linen, a guard blinking against the dark, a monk whispering psalms into his pillow, a noble woman listening for footsteps that may never come. And as you lie still now, warm, safe, wrapped in softness, you carry them all with you. This is the end of our tale tonight, but it doesn't need an ending, because boring history, calm, soft, steady, is always waiting here for you. Whether you're falling asleep to boring history, or simply wandering through gentle storytelling and ambient sounds, the sleepy historian will always leave a candle lit. So if your eyes are still open, you might gently close them now. If you're awake, you can stay a while longer. And if you've already drifted away, that's exactly where you're meant to be. Until next time, rest well, sleep deeply, and dream gently through the long halls of history.